The morning sun stretched long fingers across the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, Wyoming Territory, but Ruby Lane barely noticed. She stood on the weathered porch of her family's boarding house, calloused hands gripping a worn carpet bag that held everything she owned. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The year was 1873, and at 24, she was about to become someone else's burden. Best wait inside, her sister-in-law, Hattie Briggs, said from the doorway. Not unkindly, but with that careful distance folks used around her these days. The wagon won't be here for another hour. Ruby didn't move. She'd grown used to being treated like cracked china, once useful, now beyond repair. 3 years of marriage to Thomas Whitmore had ended with his death from consumption, leaving her nothing but the shameful whispers that trailed her like tumbleweeds in the wind. Barren, childless, cursed. The door creaked again, and her brother Amos Lane stepped out, wearing that mix of guilt and relief she'd seen coming. "Ruby," he began, clearing his throat. "You know this is for the best. Hattie's expecting again, and with 4 mouths to feed already, I understand perfectly," Ruby said, voice steady as prairie grass before a storm. She understood all too well that a woman who couldn't bear children was worth less than a lame horse in a place where big families meant survival. She knew Amos's charity had run dry, like August creek beds. "Cole Hart's a decent man." Amos went on warming to his justification. "Owns a good spread 20 miles west. Lost his wife and boy to fever 5 years back. He needs a woman to keep house." Ruby almost laughed at the bitter twist. Cole Hart. She'd heard the name whispered in saloons, when men thought their wives weren't listening. A man who had buried himself alive on that remote ranch, coming to town maybe twice a year. The perfect place to stash an embarrassment like her. "The church ladies arranged it proper," Hattie added, stepping beside Amos. "Sent word through Pastor Clyde Boone, Mr." Hart agreed to the arrangement. Arrangement. Not marriage, not partnership. Arrangement, like she was a piece of furniture sent west to fill an empty corner. Down the street, Ruby caught sight of May Knox and Mrs. Clark, huddled near the mercantile heads, bent close. When they noticed her watching, they turned away, but not before Ruby caught the flicker of satisfaction in their eyes. The church ladies had been creative indeed. Send the barren woman to the hermit cowboy, 2 misfits canceling each other out like some cruel equation. "He doesn't know, does he?" Ruby asked quietly. "Wasn't worth mentioning." Amos muttered, his face reddening. "Man needs a housekeeper. You need a home. Simple as that." But nothing about this was simple. This was their joke, their way to wash their hands of her while keeping a shine of Christian charity. Send the infertile bride to the lonely cowboy and let them stew in their supposed uselessness together. The rattle of wheels on hard-packed earth announced the freight wagon that would carry her toward that fate. Old Finn Red reined in, his weathered face carefully blank as he climbed down to heft her single trunk. "Morning, Miss Ruby," he said, tipping his hat. She'd known Finn since girlhood had served him countless meals in the boarding house dining room. Now he couldn't quite meet her eyes. Amos swung her trunk into the wagon bed. Ruby sensed how many townsfolk had suddenly found reasons to linger on Main Street. The blacksmith paused, hammer frozen mid-swing. Young Mrs. Davies stood stock still outside the general store, her basket forgotten. Even the saloon girls peered through the dusty windows of the Lucky Dollar, their painted faces unusually solemn. They'd all come to watch her exile. "You'll write?" Hattie said, though both women knew she wouldn't. "What would be the point?" Letters filled with more failures. Ruby climbed onto the wagon bench beside Finn, spine straight, despite the humiliation weighing on her shoulders. As they rattled off, a child's voice piped up behind them. "Ma, why's Miss Ruby leaving Hush now?" May Knox answered. "She's going where she belongs." The words followed Ruby past the church where she'd once married, with so much hope, past the cemetery where Thomas lay, and where her dreams of children played only in memory. The town shrank behind her, but shame rode beside her like an unwelcome passenger. "Fine weather for traveling," Finn offered once they'd left the town behind. "Yes," Ruby said, though she barely noticed the endless blue or the wildflowers freckling the prairie. Her mind was already racing ahead to that isolated ranch, to the man who'd lost everything and would now be saddled with a woman who could give him nothing. The cosmic cruelty of it all might have been funny if she still remembered how to laugh. Instead, she gripped her carpetbag tighter and watched the wide grassland roll by each mile, carrying her farther from a life that had never wanted her and closer to a man who surely wouldn't. But Ruby Lane had survived worse. She'd lived through the diagnosis that turned her from beloved wife to pitied widow. She'd endured 3 years of sideways glances and hushed conversations. She could survive this too, this banishment dressed up as mercy, this cruel joke wrapped in the respectable paper of Christian duty. The sun climbed higher as Cedar Ridge disappeared into the rolling hills. Somewhere ahead, a man named Cole Hart went about his daily chores, unaware that the town's good church ladies had decided to solve 2 problems with one loveless arrangement. "Storm's brewin'," Finn said, nodding toward dark clouds thickening on the western horizon. Ruby followed his gaze. Let it come, she thought. After all, what was one more storm to a woman who'd already lost everything worth losing? She was Ruby Lane, the so-called Barren bride shipped west like a bad joke. But storms had a way of shaking the world clean, and the western frontier had its own hard rules about a person's worth. She didn't know it yet, but she was rolling straight toward a destiny that would make liars of them all. Those proper church ladies with their tidy schemes, her brother Amos Lane with his guilty relief, every last soul who judged her value by what her body couldn't give, they would all have their reckoning. For now, she was just a lone woman in a freight wagon heading west beneath a thickening sky, carrying nothing but shame and a carpetbag of carefully mended clothes. Folks figured the joke was on her. Time would tell who'd get the last laugh. The storm Finn Red had warned of caught them 10 miles out of Cedar Ridge, turning the trail to a brown river. By the time they reached the unmarked path leading to Cole Hart's ranch, both Ruby and the old driver were soaked through their clothes, plastered like second skins. Late-day sun broke through as Finn drew the team to a halt at a weather-beaten gate. "This is as far as I go," he said, eyes skimming past hers. "Ranch house sits another mile up that track." Ruby studied the narrow trail cutting through the grassland like a scar. No turning back now. She climbed down boots, squelching in mud, and helped Finn lower her trunk. "You sure about this, Miss Ruby?" Finn asked quietly at last, meeting her eyes. "Could tell folks you changed your mind, decided to head east to kin. I've got no kin back east," she answered, gripping the carpetbag's handle. "Thank you for the kindness, Finn, but this is where I aim to be." He didn't argue, only tipped his hat and clucked to the horses. Ruby watched the wagon shrink into the distance, carrying away her last tie to Cedar Ridge. Then she faced forward. The trunk was too heavy to haul the whole mile, so she left it by the gate and set off with only her carpetbag. The land grew wilder with every step, tall grass brushing her skirt, an endless sky pressing down like a weight. Half a mile on the ranch buildings rose from the prairie like dark ships on a golden sea. The house squatted low against the horizon logs, silvered with age. A barn leaned to one side, its door crooked while a few outbuildings sprawled around like forgotten afterthoughts. A thin trail of smoke from the chimney proved someone lived there. Ruby paused at the yard's edge, suddenly conscious of her mud-streaked dress and hair hanging loose from its pins. She probably looked like something the storm had tossed in close enough to the truth. Before she could knock, the door opened. The man filling the frame was nothing like she'd pictured. Cole Hart stood a solid 6+ feet shoulders, hardened by years of wrestling cattle and weather. Dark hair streaked with early gray brushed his collar, though he couldn't be more than 35. But it was his eyes, gray as winter sky, and just as guarded, that stopped her cold. "You're the woman from town," he said. Not a question. Ruby Lane, she managed, lifting her chin despite the rain still dripping from her hair. He looked her over for a long moment, expression unreadable. "You're late. I expected you hours ago. Where's your trunk back at the gate? Too heavy to drag through the mud." Without another word, he strode past her, his long steps eating up the track. Ruby stood dripping on the porch, unsure whether to follow or wait. She chose to wait, using the pause to take in her new home porch boards, warped and broken windows bare of curtains, a garden long gone to weeds. Everything spoke of a man who had given up on anything beyond bare survival. Cole returned sooner than she expected, her trunk balanced on one shoulder as if it weighed nothing. He set it down gently, then crossed his arms. "Best get inside and dry off," he said. "Storm's not finished yet." Inside was even starker. The main room served as both kitchen and parlor, with a cold fireplace, a rough table, and 2 chairs, a shelf of meager dishes. Dust lay everywhere, as if the place had been holding its breath for years. "Your room's down the hall, last door," Cole said, still not using her name. "Was my wife's sewing room. Cleared it yesterday when I heard you were coming." Ruby wondered if saying his wife's name hurt too much. "Thank you," she said softly. "Change clothes, then rest," he added. "Tomorrow's soon enough to sort the rest." Turning away, he busied himself at the stove. Taking the hint, Ruby carried her bag to the small, clean room, just a narrow bed washstand and a window staring at endless prairie. She changed quickly into her second-best dress, wrung out her hair, and pinned it back as best she could. When she returned, Cole had set a plate of beans cornbread and what might be salt pork on the table. "Eat," he said, then carried his own plate outside to the porch. Ruby ate alone, the food plain and oversalted, but welcome. She was rinsing dishes when Cole came back bringing the scent of rain and tobacco. He stood by the door, posture taut, as if half ready to leave again. "We need to be clear about a few things," he said. "I only agreed to this setup because Pastor Clyde Boone is a hard man to turn down." "Cole Hart," said his voice low but sharp as a spur. "I'm not hunting for a wife, not looking for anything except someone to keep house and mind their own business." "I understand," Ruby Lane answered, her hands still sunk in the dishwater. "Do you?" His gray eyes pinned her with a look that cut deeper than the words. "This isn't town life," he went on. "Nearest neighbor's 8 miles east. You might glimpse another soul once a month when I ride in for supplies. Can you handle that? I've been alone in a room full of people." "Mr. Hart," she said quietly. "Real solitude can't be worse." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe recognition, before his usual stillness slid back in place. "I rise at dawn and work till dark," he continued. "Breakfast at 5, dinner at noon, supper when the chores are done. Wash on Monday's town trip first Saturday. You'll have egg money if I can get those hens laying again." Questions? Just one. Ruby turned to face him fully. "Why did you agree to this?" "Really?" He stood silent so long she thought he might ignore her. "Then ranch is falling apart. I can't keep up alone. Boone said you needed a roof. Seemed like a fair trade shelter for help keeping things running." "A fair trade. Not a marriage, not a partnership, Just two battered lives sharing work and space. At least he was plain-spoken. "Then we understand each other," Ruby said. He nodded once and started down the hallway. "Storm should blow through by morning. I'll be in the barn early. Got a cow about to calve. Coffee's in the tin by the stove." At the bedroom door, he stopped still with his back to her. "That room's Sarah's sewing room. She died in the big bedroom. My boy, too. Fever took them both the same night. That's why that door stays closed." Then he was gone, leaving Ruby alone in the glow of the oil lamp. She finished the dishes slowly, letting the familiar rhythm steady her. Outside, thunder rolled across the prairie like a freight wagon from heaven. So his wife's name had been Sarah. They'd had a child, a life, and lost it all in one cruel night. No wonder he'd walled himself off 20 miles from sympathy or small talk. Ruby dried her hands on a worn towel and glanced around the neglected kitchen. Tomorrow, she'd start bringing life back into this house. She would scrub, mend, and cook until her fingers cracked, if that's what it took not to replace Sarah, not to mend Cole Hart's wounds, but because honest work was all she had to give, and labor would quiet the ache of her own failures. The storm howled on, but inside the cabin a strange calm settled. Two broken souls under one roof. No masks, no false hopes. It wasn't the life either had planned, but it was what they had. Ruby blew out the lamp and walked to the small room that once held another woman's dreams. Through the thin walls, she heard Cole moving in his own quarters, the floor creaking, then silence broken only by rain drumming the roof and wind scraping the eaves. Her first night in this place, no celebration, no wedding bed, no promises. Just a straightforward bargain between two people the world had already given up on. Yet as Ruby lay down listening to the storm, she felt something unexpected relief. Here she no longer had to pretend to be whole. Here her emptiness met his, and neither owed an apology. By morning, she was simply Ruby Lane housekeeper to a grieving rancher, alone in a room once meant for someone else's future, miles from anyone who had ever called her cursed. And in a hard-to-explain way, it was the truest night of her life. The first month blurred into relentless work and wary distance. Ruby rose before dawn, kneading bread, mending fences, coaxing life from the forgotten garden. Cole kept his word about minding their own business, often eating half his meals on the porch, no matter the weather. Yet, little by little, the ranch shifted under her hands. Windows gleamed for the first time in years. Flour sack curtains she'd bleached and stitched brightened bare rooms. The garden weeded and tended, pushed up late tomatoes and hearty squash. Even the hens coaxed with steady feeding, and a repaired coop began to lay again. "Coffee tastes better lately," Cole remarked one early morning, the most words he'd offered in days. "Found chicory by the creek," Ruby replied, cutting biscuit dough. "My mother used to add it for flavor." He made a quiet sound that might have been approval, then headed out to check the cattle. Progress measured in teaspoons, but progress all the same. The real turning came on a crisp October morning, when Ruby found the garden fence reinforced overnight. New posts stood straight wire pulled tight. Cole's work, his precise hand left like a secret gift. She returned the kindness by sorting the chaos in the barn hanging tools, in order instead of leaving them scattered like thoughts from a troubled mind. Neither mentioned these quiet offerings, but the space between them eased like a knot slowly unwinding. One evening, as purple twilight pooled over the prairie, Ruby found Cole on the porch steps, staring at a small carving in his hands, a half-finished toy horse. "Making it for," he began, then stopped, jaw tightening. "What was his name?" Ruby asked softly, settling on the step below him. "Tim," he said at last, voice rough with long silence. Would have turned 8 come Christmas. Ruby said nothing more. She simply sat with him as the stars pricked open across the darkening sky. After a while, Cole Hart set the toy aside and stepped inside. But he'd spoken his boy's name out loud, and that meant something. Next morning, Ruby found him already in the garden splitting potatoes for winter storage. Could use a hand, he said, without looking up the first time he'd asked instead of simply expecting. They worked shoulder to shoulder through the cool morning, their motions falling into quiet rhythm. Cole showed her how to separate seed potatoes and pack them in sand to keep through the winter. His scarred, work-toughened hands were unexpectedly gentle with the living soil. Sarah loved this garden, he said suddenly. Planted flowers with the vegetables. Claimed beauty mattered as much as bread. She was right, Ruby replied, brushing dirt from a heavy potato. I tore them out after he went on as if he hadn't heard. Couldn't stand to see blooms she'd never see. Ruby's hands paused. Maybe it's time to plant some again. Not for her, she had her flowers, but for us for now. Cole looked at her, then really looked for the first time since she'd arrived. You always this practical about grief. I've had practice, Ruby said simply. That afternoon, while Cole tended cattle, Ruby wandered to the creek, where wildflowers still held on, despite the late season. She gathered seeds, black-eyed Susan's prairie roses, wild lupine. Come spring, she'd plant them along the garden fence. Not Sarah's flowers, but new ones, a quiet defiance against loss. The first freeze came early, catching them off guard. Ruby woke to frost lace on the window and her own breath in the cold air. The house had no heat beyond the kitchen stove and the big fireplace. She dressed in every warm layer she owned and hurried to start a fire. Cole was already bringing in wood. Hard winter coming, he said. Need to move the cattle to the south pasture today, closer to shelter. I'll help, Ruby offered. He started to refuse, then thought better of it. Can you ride well enough? So Ruby found herself astride a steady mare named Buttercup, helping drive 30 head of cattle across frozen ground. The work was rough, cold, and thrilling. When a young steer bolted, she wheeled Buttercup and drove it back with sharp precision. You ride better than well enough, Cole remarked, pulling alongside. My father raised horses before he ran a boarding house, Ruby said, patting Buttercup's neck. I grew up in the saddle. Full of surprises, aren't you? It was as close to a compliment as he'd ever come. Warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the ride. That night, with the herd settled and a storm brewing, they shared supper at the kitchen table. The quiet between them felt easy, now filled only with the small sounds of a meal. Thank you, Cole said suddenly. For today, I'd been trying to move that herd alone for a week. We're partners in this arrangement, Ruby reminded him. Partners help each other. He studied her across the table, lamplight softening the hard lines of his face. That what we are, partners, aren't we? He didn't answer, but later when the storm roared in, he built up the fire and fetched extra blankets. No sense freezing in separate rooms, he said gruffly. Sarah and I used to sleep by the fire on nights like this. They made separate bedrolls on opposite sides of the hearth, keeping a proper distance. Yet as the wind rattled the windows, they talked, truly talked for the first time. Cole spoke of his Missouri childhood of riding west with dreams bigger than his means. Ruby told of her family's boarding house, of her marriage to Thomas, and the doctor's verdict that had changed everything. Doesn't make you less of a woman, Cole said quietly when she finished. Sarah lost 2 before Tim came along. Near broke her each time. Having children or not ain't what makes a person whole. Tears stung Ruby's eyes. No one had ever said that to her. What does make a person whole, then? She asked. Cole stared into the flames a long moment. Being useful, I reckon, Having work that counts? Someone to share the load with, maybe? By morning, the storm had spent itself, leaving the prairie gleaming under fresh snow. Cole was already up, coffee steaming on the stove. He handed Ruby a cup, and their fingers lingered together just a beat longer than a month ago. "Fence in the north pasture needs fixing," he said. "Storm likely tore it worse." "I'll pack lunch," Ruby offered. "We can make a day of it." He repeated as if tasting the word. Then he nodded. All right. They worked through biting cold, replacing posts, and stretching wire, their breath puffing white in the air. When Ruby's hands grew too numb for the tools, Cole noticed without a word. He pulled off his own gloves and pressed them into her hands, waving off her protest. "Got tougher skin than you," he said. "Let's keep at it sooner. We're done. Sooner we get warm." By sundown, the prairie blushed with rose and gold as they rode home side by side, silence easy between them. Ruby knew something had shifted. They were no longer strangers bound by a mere arrangement. They had become something steadier, not husband and wife maybe, but true partners. That night, as Ruby set out supper, Cole brought in an extra armload of wood without her even asking. He fixed the loose porch board she'd meant to mention quiet tasks that spoke louder than any pledge. That was how Cole Hart showed care, through the steady language of action. "Winter's bound to be a long haul," he said over supper, "but I reckon we'll manage." "Together," Ruby Lane added. He looked up, and for the first time since she'd stepped onto his porch, Cole smiled. Just a faint lift of the mouth, yet it lit his face like sunrise. Together, he agreed. Outside, wind scoured the prairie. Inside, two battered hearts were shaping something new. Not love, maybe not yet, but trust. Understanding. A partnership hammered out of shared work and quiet acceptance. More than either had hoped when this arrangement began. Enough for now. December brought a blizzard fiercer than anyone in these parts could remember. For 3 endless days, snow fell in thick curtains, burying the ranch in drifts that licked the windowsills. Cole and Ruby fought to keep the cattle alive, hauling hay through waist-deep snow, chopping ice from troughs, checking beasts for frostbite and fever. By the third night, they slumped by the fire, each with a bowl of thin soup scraped together from what little remained in the pantry after the storm cut off their town run. "Should have gone last week," Cole muttered, staring into his bowl. "Saw the signs, but figured we had time." "We'll manage," Ruby said, though hunger twisted in her belly. "Storm can't last forever." A sharp crack split the wind, 3 shots spaced evenly. Cole's head jerked up. "That's gunfire. Distress signal," Ruby said quickly. "Could be travelers caught out, or trouble using the storm as cover." Cole was already reaching for his rifle. "Either way, we can't ignore it. I'm coming with you. Like hell you are. Cole Hart, you listen to me." Ruby rose, meeting his glare with her own. "If someone's hurt, they'll need care I can give. If it's trouble, you'll need a second set of eyes. Either way, you're not going alone." They locked eyes will against will until Cole finally gave a sharp nod. "Get the shotgun. Remember how to use it better than you might guess." Bundled in every layer they owned, Cole carried his rifle and a lantern while Ruby gripped the shotgun Thomas had once taught her to fire. Outside, the world was a white nightmare. Snow knifed sideways visibility, shrinking to feet. Cole led along the fence line toward the shots, Ruby close behind, heart hammering. Cold gnawed through their coats, numbing hands and feet. A dark mass loomed out of the storm, 4 horses pressed tight to a fence, and shadowy figures clinging to them for warmth. "Hello, the camp," Cole called, rifle ready but lowered. Thank God, a woman's voice cried, hoarse with relief. "Please, we need help." As they neared, Ruby made out 4 travelers, 2 men, 2 women, all half frozen. One man slumped unconscious against his horse. Got caught when the storm hit, one woman explained through chattering teeth. Ben's hurt horse threw him. Arms likely broken. Let's get them inside, Ruby said, moving to steady the injured man. Cole hesitated a heartbeat, caution warring with decency, then slung his rifle and took the man's other side. House is this way. Stay close. The fight back through drifts felt endless, but at last the cabin's warmth wrapped around them. Ruby took command with the practiced hand of a boarding house keeper. Get those wet clothes off, all of you. Cole piled wood on the fire. I'll heat water. For an hour, the room was controlled chaos. Ruby splinted the man's arm with barrel staves, and strips torn from her petticoat stretched the last of their soup with cornmeal and water. Cole hauled wood-found dry shirts for the men and helped settle the women. Name's Frank Morrison, said the uninjured man once everyone huddled by the flames. This is my brother Ben, and our wives Mary and Catherine. We're headed to Oregon Territory. Got separated from the wagon train 2 days back. In December, Cole's disbelief cut through the crackle of the fire. Frank's face darkened. Wagon master insisted on pushing through, said we were behind. When Ben got hurt, he left us. Left you to die, Cole said flatly. Cole, Ruby said softly, a quiet rebuke. These people needed help, not judgment. As the storm eased, the travelers shared what little food they carried: dried fruit, hardtack, a precious bag of coffee beans. Stories circled the fire, and Ruby surprised herself by laughing at Mary's tale of cooking over a campfire in a windstorm. You two been married long? Catherine asked at one point, her curious gaze shifting between Cole and Ruby. We're not, Ruby Lane began, but Cole Hart cut in smoothly. Few months, he said, as if the words cost nothing, though his jaw tightened on the last syllable. Heat flared in Ruby's cheeks, and not from the fire. It was the first time either had spoken of their arrangement as anything more than pure practicality. You're fortunate, Mary Morrison said softly, resting a hand on her husband's bandaged arm. Out here having someone to ride out storms with, that's everything. Later, when the travelers were bedded down, wherever space allowed, Ruby and Cole found themselves alone in the kitchen. Ruby was banking the fire when he spoke. You did good tonight. Real good. We both did, she answered. Made a good team. That's what I meant earlier, he said quietly. About being married, it didn't seem right to explain. Whatever this is, and maybe a sudden crash outside sliced the words short. Cole grabbed his rifle and was out the door before Ruby could blink. She snatched the shotgun and followed Hart pounding to find him standing over a man sprawled in the snow near the barn. Don't shoot. The stranger's voice was slurred as he lifted his hands. Just looking for my friends. Saw horses. Something was off. His clothes were too fine for a lost traveler, his horse sleek and well-fed, and his eyes, sharp and cold, measured them both with unnerving calculation. Your friends are inside, Cole said evenly. You can join them, much obliged. The man staggered upright. Name's Buck Crow. Ruby caught the slight stiffening of Cole's shoulders. She knew that name whispered back at the boarding house when men thought no one listened. Buck Crow rode with the Wallace gang rustlers, and worse, who haunted the territory. Still turning him away in this weather would be a death sentence. They brought him inside, though Ruby noticed how Cole kept his rifle within arm's reach and stood where he could guard the door. Buck played at gratitude, warming himself by the fire, but his eyes never rested, counting people, noting supplies, sizing up what might be worth stealing. The other travelers, dulled by fatigue, missed it. Ruby did not. Quite a spread you have here, Buck said casually. Must be tough just the two of you managing all this. We manage fine, Cole replied. Still, that's a lot of cattle for two folks. Easy for a few head to go missing in weather like this. Of course, neighbors help each other, don't they? Share the wealth. The threat was veiled but clear. Ruby saw Frank Morrison narrow his eyes as he grasped the danger. She moved with deliberate calm to the counter where the kitchen knives lay, letting her hand rest near one. "My husband's known for his marksmanship," she said lightly, as if discussing the evening's coffee. "Won the county shoot 3 years running. Dropped a wolf at 300 yards, one shot clean through the eye." It was pure bluff. She had no idea if Cole could shoot like that. But Buck didn't know either, and Ruby caught the flicker of unease that crossed his face. "Impressive," Buck said slowly. "A man like that must have friends, other folks who'd notice if something happened." "The whole valley," Cole said without missing a beat. "Good people. Look out for each other." The night stretched taut as wire. Ruby didn't dare sleep, and she knew Cole wouldn't either. They kept watch by the fire weapons within reach, while their weary guests dozed and the blizzard howled itself empty. When dawn finally came pale and hard, Buck was the first to leave. He claimed he had to catch up with the rest of his party and rode off without a backward glance. Ruby exhaled only when he disappeared beyond the ridge. "He'll be back," Cole said grimly. "With friends. Then we'd better be ready." Frank, his arm bound but steady, overheard. "We're not leaving you to face that alone, not after what you've done for us." "You've got injured folks," Cole argued. "And you've got neighbors now," Frank replied firmly. "Temporary maybe, but neighbors all the same. They spent the morning shoring up defenses, checking weapons, boarding windows, mapping fields of fire." Ruby felt an odd calm settle over her. After months of fleeing shame, meeting danger head-on felt almost clean. But Buck Crow never returned. Not that day or the next. Maybe the storm had scattered his gang. Maybe he'd decided a small ranch wasn't worth the risk. Or maybe he was simply biding his time. On the third day, with clear skies and passable trails, the Morrisons prepared to leave. "We owe you our lives," Mary said, hugging Ruby tight. "You've already given us something," Ruby replied. "Reminded us we're not alone out here." As the wagon pulled away, Cole stood beside Ruby on the porch, watching until the travelers vanished over the white horizon. "You called me your husband," Ruby said softly. "And you called me a marksman with trophies," he countered, a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. "We protected each other. That's what partners do." They stood side by side as the sun climbed, turning the snowfield to silver and gold. Something had shifted during that long night of danger. By claiming each other even in protective lies, they'd admitted a truth neither had been ready to speak. "Storms pass," Cole said at last. "This one has," Ruby agreed. "But there'll be others." "Reckon so." He looked at her, a new light in his gray eyes. "Not love, not yet, but possibility." "Good thing we're partners, then." "Good thing," she echoed. Together they stepped inside, leaving the door unbarred. They'd learned something vital when trouble came. They wouldn't face it alone. The next test arrived on a brittle February morning. A soft knock barely cut through the hiss of coffee boiling on the stove. Cole was out in the barn, leaving Ruby alone in the warming kitchen. She opened the door to find a young woman swaying on the porch face, ashen with exhaustion, a bundle clutched tight to her chest. "Please," the stranger whispered, and collapsed. Ruby caught her before she hit the boards and eased her into a chair by the stove. The bundle stirred, letting out a thin wail, a baby hardly weeks old. Cole Ruby called sharply. He was already on his way, drawn by the newborn's cry. Cole Hart froze in the doorway, the color draining from his face at the sight before him. "Get blankets," Ruby Lane ordered, her voice steady as she seized command, "and heat some milk." The young stranger burned with fever breaths, shallow and ragged. Ruby peeled back the grime-stained shawl and found a face barely 20, etched by illness and hard miles. "My baby," the woman gasped, pressing a tiny bundle into Ruby's arms. Please, take care of my baby." "What's your name?" Ruby asked softly, cradling the child. The fragile weight, warm and alive, squeezed her heart in ways she hadn't known were possible. "Belle Hart," the woman whispered a cough, racking her thin frame until blood flecked her lips. "Came from Kansas, looking for his father, but another fit of coughing cut her words. Cole returned with blankets and warm milk, his movements controlled, though Ruby saw the tremor in his hands as he eased Belle onto a bed of quilts near the fire. The baby's father, Ruby, prompted gently. "Gone." Belle rasped. "Mine collapse in Colorado. Got the news last week. No kin left. Been walking for days." Her fever-bright eyes fixed on Ruby. The baby stirred, fussing. Ruby instinctively rocked him, humming a tune she hadn't sung in years. She'd always turned her way from infants before the ache too sharp. But now something inside her opened like a door in spring. "What's his name?" she asked. "Amos Lane," after his daddy, Belle breathed. "Good baby, barely cries, just needs someone." Her voice faded to a whisper. They fought to save Belle Hart, but consumption had sunk too deep. She lingered 3 days, growing weaker, despite Ruby's constant nursing. Cole rode to town for Doc Rufus Lane, but the doctor could only confirm what their hearts already knew. On the last night, Belle summoned unexpected strength to grip Ruby's hand. "I've nothing to leave him, no money, no kin. But you," her voice trembled, "I see how you hold him. Promise me don't let him end up in some orphanage. Promise you'll raise him." Ruby looked down at baby Amos asleep in the drawer they'd turned into a cradle, his tiny fists curled like petals. Cole stood silent in the shadows. "I promise," Ruby whispered. Just before dawn, Belle Hart slipped away with a faint smile. They buried her on the rise behind the house, marking the spot with a plain wooden cross. Cole read a few Bible verses while Ruby held the child, who seemed to sense the hush and stayed quiet. "What now?" Ruby asked as they walked back toward the house. "We're not legally, I'll ride to town tomorrow," Cole said. "Talk to Judge Eli Frost. See what papers we need to make it right." "Cole?" She stopped him. "This isn't what you signed on for, taking in another man's child with me being." "Don't," he said roughly. "Don't finish that. The boy needs a home. We've got one. That's reason enough." But they both knew nothing about it was simple. That night, Ruby sat by the fire. Amos nestled in her arms, marveling at his tiny, perfect fingers, the way his mouth worked in sleep as if he dreamed of milk. Cole watched quietly from across the room, his face unreadable. "You look natural with him," he said at last. "I never thought I'd—" Ruby's voice broke. "All those years wanting a child until the wanting hollowed me out." "Life's got a crooked sense of humor," Cole said gently. "Sarah used to tell me God's timing isn't ours." It was the first time he'd spoken his late wife's name since Ruby arrived, a small but deep gift of trust. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "Taking on a baby that isn't yours with a woman who isn't truly your wife." Cole crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, brushing a calloused finger across Amos's downy head. "Told you before, having children or not doesn't make someone whole. Loving them might. This boy needs parents. Maybe." He met her gaze, something fierce and protective in his eyes. "Maybe we need him too." The weeks that followed blurred with the new rhythm of life. Ruby had cared for babies at the boarding house, but sole responsibility was another world. Amos needed feeding every few hours, changing soothing when he fussed. She paced the floor at night, humming half-remembered lullabies, while Cole stepped in whenever she was too worn to stand. They built a quiet routine, Ruby tending Amos while Cole managed the ranch. Then Cole, cradling the baby as Ruby cooked and cleaned. More than once, she found them in the barn, Cole explaining weather signs and cattle habits while Amos rode in a sling against his chest. "He's a good listener," Cole said when she teased him. "Doesn't interrupt like some folks." The change in Cole was subtle, but steady. The darkness in his eyes lightened when he held Amos. He even started whistling again, old hymns Ruby half remembered, and sometimes she caught him smiling at the baby with such pure tenderness it tightened her throat. The legal side proved easier than expected. Judge Eli Frost, an old friend of Cole's father, listened kindly. "No living kin for Belle Hart," he confirmed, scanning the documents. "You're willing to take the child, provide for him?" "Yes, sir," Cole said firmly. "And you, Mrs. Hart?" the judge asked. Ruby blinked at the title, then nodded. "Yes, we want to raise him." The judge's eyes softened. "Then there's no problem. I'll draw up the adoption papers. Young Amos is fortunate to have found you, but not everyone shared his goodwill. Their first trip to Cedar Ridge with the baby stirred a storm of gossip. The same women who once whispered about Ruby's barrenness now whispered about this sudden child. How convenient, some muttered, that a baby appeared just when the barren woman needed one. "Let them talk," Cole Hart said, when Ruby Lane told him of the fresh gossip swirling through Cedar Ridge. "They've got nothing better to do." But Ruby caught the hard set of his jaw the way he quietly positioned himself between her and sharp tongues whenever they went for supplies. One afternoon, May Knox cornered Ruby outside the mercantile. "Where exactly did that baby come from? Seems mighty peculiar, a dying woman just happening to land on your doorstep." "Nothing peculiar about it." Cole's voice cut in smooth and cold. He had stepped up so silently Ruby hadn't heard him approach little Amos Lane sleeping against his shoulder. Woman was sick, needed help. "We gave it. Now we're raising her boy. Anyone with a problem can take it up with me." May faltered beneath his steady stare and retreated, but Ruby knew the talk would keep. Small towns always found room for rumor. That night with Amos drowsing in his cradle by the fire, Ruby spoke her worry. "What if someone contests the adoption claims we're unfit? Then we fight," Cole said simply. "He's our son now. Anyone who wants him will have to come through me." The words hung between them bright and heavy as gold. "Cole?" Ruby's voice softened. "What are we doing?" "Playing house like children." He met her gaze across the sleeping baby. "Nothing childish about it. We're raising a boy who needs us building a family the best way we know. Maybe not the family either of us pictured, but a family all the same." Tears warmed Ruby's cheeks. "I don't know how to thank you for taking him in, for accepting this life." "No thanks needed." His voice was rough. "The boy's lucky to have you for a mother. Natural or not, you love him. Anyone can see it." "And he's lucky to have you," she said. "You're patient, gentle. Good with him." "Had practice once," Cole answered quietly. "Thought I'd forgotten how. But it comes back." They sat in easy silence, watching Amos sleep, while snow sifted down outside. Within their modest house, warmth and belonging gathered like a soft quilt. They had built something unexpected, a family born of choice and quiet devotion. "Tomorrow I'll start teaching him about the ranch," Cole said with a half smile. Ruby chuckled. "He's barely 2 months old." "Perfect age to start," Cole teased. "By the time he's walking, he'll know every horse by name." "And I'll teach him letters," Ruby added. "How to tend the garden and bake bread. Boy's bound to be sharp with you teaching him," Cole said, eyes warm. Plans, real plans, unfurled between them for a future neither had dared imagine. The barren woman, the widower who'd lost everything, and the baby who'd arrived out of winter's mercy, they had somehow found each other. "I should check the stock," Cole said, yet he didn't move. In a minute, Ruby agreed, equally unwilling to break the quiet spell. They stayed until the fire burned low, 2 souls once adrift, now anchored by the small boy who had rewritten their lives. Amos stirred and stretched out one tiny hand. Ruby brushed his fingers, and he clasped her thumb with surprising strength. Cole leaned close until his shoulder touched hers. A family against every odd and expectation, they had become one. Spring came late that year, carrying trouble dressed in polish. Ruby first glimpsed it through the kitchen window, a tall man stepping from a hired carriage, clothes too fine for ranch country movements, slick and deliberate. Cole. She called softly, careful not to wake Amos from his nap. Someone's coming. Cole strode from the barn, eyes narrowing as he sized up the stranger. He joined Ruby on the porch, subtly shielding her and the house. Mr. Hart. The visitor's voice was smooth, educated back east. Name's Gage Hollis. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Ruby's heart clenched. Instinctively, she moved nearer the doorway toward the cradle where Amos slept. Nothing here belongs to you, Cole said evenly. Gage offered a thin smile that never reached his eyes. I'm afraid that's where you're mistaken. I've been searching for my son, born 3 months ago to a woman named Belle Hart. Belle is dead, Ruby said, her voice steady despite the chill running through her. She died of consumption. Yes, I heard. Tragic. His tone carried no grief. But that doesn't change the fact the child is mine. I have documents proving paternity, and I'm prepared to take this to court. He withdrew a leather folder papers stamped with official seals. Cole didn't reach for them. Convenient you showing up now, he said, his voice like distant thunder. Where were you when Belle was sick and starving? When she walked through winter storms for help? For a heartbeat, Gage's mask slipped, exposing something cold and hard. I knew nothing of her condition. We had a brief acquaintance in Kansas. I only recently learned of the child's existence. And now you want him, Ruby said flatly. He is my son, my heir. I've recently inherited considerable property back east. The boy would have every advantage, education, society, opportunity you can't provide. Ruby felt Cole tense beside her and laid a calming hand on his arm. We've legally adopted Amos, she said. Judge Eli Frost approved it. He's our child now. Gage's smile sharpened. An adoption finalized without a biological father's consent can be contested, especially when that father has means and standing. Any court would agree the child is better off with me. His gaze swept over the modest ranch with open disdain. Get off my land, Cole said quietly. The quietness made the threat stronger than a shout. I'll be in town, Gage replied, unruffled. At the Grand Hotel. Consider my offer. I'm willing to compensate you $500, enough to restock and polish up this little homestead. You think we'd sell him? Ruby's voice trembled with fury. Like he's a head of cattle, I think you'll do what's best for the child, Gage said coolly. Education connections, not a lifetime of toil on a fading ranch. Cole stepped forward, forcing Gage back a pace. You've said your piece. Now leave and don't come back without the sheriff. The hired carriage rolled away, leaving silence heavy as storm clouds. Ruby and Cole stood motionless on the porch, hearts pounding the threat of a new battle, settling over their hard-won peace. Inside the house, Amos Lane woke with a sharp wail, as though he sensed the tension on the porch. Ruby Lane hurried to him, lifting him close and pressing his tiny body against her heart. He can't take him, she said fiercely. I won't let him. Cole Hart paced the room like a caged wolf. A man with money and lawyers will need help. Help came from unexpected quarters. The next morning they rode to Cedar Ridge and met with Judge Eli Frost, who listened grimly. Hollis has already called on me, he said, naming Gage Hollis with a hard edge. He waved money, hinted at influence. But the law is plain, you adopted that boy legal and proper. His mother entrusted him to you with her dying breath. That carries weight. But if he really is the father? Ruby couldn't finish. Being a father is more than blood, Judge Frost said firmly. It's showing up. It's sacrifice. It's love. You two have been that boy's parents when it mattered. That counts in my court. Word spread quickly through town. By afternoon, Cedar Ridge had taken sides. Many surprised them with support. Frank and Mary Morrison, still wintering nearby, spoke out boldly. Even May Knox, once the sharpest gossip, declared, "Money don't make a man fit to raise a child." But Gage Hollis gathered allies too, folks dazzled by his wealth and promises to invest in the town. The Grand Hotel Saloon became his headquarters, where he bragged of the fine education and opportunity he'd give young Amos. Legal fire followed fast. Hollis hired a Denver attorney who filed papers challenging the adoption. Cole and Ruby had to spend their planting savings on their own lawyer, Tom Brennan Young, but steady. "We'll need character witnesses," Brennan said. The list was shorter than Ruby wished, but longer than she feared. Doc Rufus Lane agreed to testify about their care for Belle Hart and her child. Pastor Clyde Boone promised to vouch for their good standing. The Morrisons pledged to return from their new homestead to speak on their behalf. And the most unexpected ally was Marcus Cole, owner of the Mercantile. "That Hollis fellow's been sniffing around," Marcus told them one afternoon. "Asking about your finances, your habits, even tried to bribe young Mike the clerk for your account records." He spat in disgust. "Don't like his type's slick talk and no backbone." As the court date neared, the pressure sharpened. Ruby found crude notes shoved under their door warning her to do the right thing. Twice someone cut their fences, scattering cattle. One bitter night, gunshots cracked near the barn, bullets kicking up snow but striking nothing, just a message. "He's trying to wear us down," Cole said, while mending the fence yet again. "Make us think Amos isn't worth the fight." "Then he doesn't know us," Ruby replied, handing him nails while Amos balanced on her hip. The baby had filled out in the month since he arrived, all bright eyes and eager hands. The idea of losing him was unthinkable. One evening, as Ruby closed the chicken coop, a shadow detached itself from the dark Gage Hollis. She hadn't heard his approach. "Mrs. Hart," he said smoothly. "I hoped we might speak privately." "My husband's in the north pasture," Ruby answered coolly. "I made sure of that." His smile was thin and predatory. "I want you to understand something. I always get what I want. This child, my son, means legacy, the continuation of the Hollis name." "He already has a name," Ruby said evenly. "Amos Lane." Gage's pleasant mask tightened. "You're being foolish. I could make your life easy, $1,000, enough to start fresh somewhere, maybe even adopt a child of your own someday." "Get out," Ruby said, steel in her voice, "before I fetch the shotgun." "Think it over," he warned, backing off. "A barren woman cast off by her own kin, what future can you offer him? With me, he'd have everything." After he left, Ruby sat on the porch steps, trembling, not with fear, but with fury. How dare he throw her past in her face? How dare he treat Amos like property? Cole found her there when he returned. She told him everything. His face hardened to stone. "I should have been here," he said. "No," Ruby said, chin high. "I handled it. I'm not some fragile blossom. If that man wants a fight, he'll get one." The hearing came on a bright May morning. The courthouse brimmed with neighbors eager for the showdown. Amos, dressed in his best outfit, sewn from one of Ruby's old dresses, gurgled happily, unaware of the battle over his life. Hollis's lawyer painted a picture of privileged Eastern schools, polished society wealth, beyond reach of a dusty ranch. He produced papers suggesting Belle Hart's questionable morals, hinting at other men. "Objection." Brennan leapt to his feet. "The deceased cannot defend herself." "Sustained," Judge Frost said sharply. "Stick to the facts, counselor." When it was their turn, the witnesses spoke plain and true. Doc Rufus described Ruby's tireless care for Belle and natural love for Amos. The Morrisons told of the blizzard of the couple's courage and teamwork. Then Pastor Clyde Boone delivered the hardest blow. "I received a telegram from a minister friend in Kansas," he said. "Mr. Hollis is already married 10 years now. His wife and 3 children live in Boston." The courtroom erupted. Hollis's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The man claiming paternal rights for legacy's sake was exposed as an adulterer who'd abandoned Belle. "Your Honor, Brennan said once order returned, we submit that Mr. Hollis's interest lies not in fatherhood, but in the inheritance he recently mentioned. According to Gage Hollis's late uncle's will, the Hollis fortune could pass only to a legitimate male heir. His daughters back east didn't qualify." Ruby Lane felt the pieces lock together. Hollis didn't want a child to love. He wanted an heir to keep his inheritance intact. Little Amos Lane was nothing more than a key to a vault. Judge Eli Frost's verdict came swift and sure. The court finds that the adoption of Amos Lane by Cole Hart and Ruby Lane was entered in good faith and serves the child's best interests. Mr. Hollis's petition is denied. As the gavel cracked like a rifle shot, Ruby's knees wavered with relief. Cole's arm steadied her, while Amos babbled between them, blissfully unaware of the storm that had nearly uprooted his life. Hollis brushed past them on the courthouse steps, his voice a venomous hiss. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Cole said quietly, the weight of a promise in every word. "Come near my family again, and a courtroom will be the least of your troubles." That evening they sat on their porch as Amos played at their feet. The ranch no longer felt like a lonely refuge for 2 broken souls. It had become a real home, a place where love mattered more than blood. "We did it," Ruby said softly. "You did it," Cole corrected. "Standing up to him like that. You're stronger than you know, Ruby Hart." It was the first time he'd called her by her married name without any legal reason. Her heart skipped at the sound. "We're all Harts now," she said, lifting Amos until he squealed with laughter. "A true family." The best kind, Cole agreed, his calloused hand finding hers in the dusk. The kind that stands and fights together. Summer brought new heat and an unexpected visitor. Late in June, a woman carrying a weathered leather satchel appeared at their gate. Her face bore the lines of hard travel and harder choices. Mrs. Hart, the stranger, asked, voice thin but determined. "My name's Margaret Walsh. I've come about the Hollis matter." Ruby froze, hand tight around the hoe. "The court's already ruled." "I know," Margaret said. "I'm not here to stir trouble, just the opposite. I've got something you need to hear." Cole emerged from the barn, instinctively moving to Ruby's side, his eyes sharp on the stranger. "I was Belle Hart's friend back in Kansas," Margaret said, squaring her shoulders. "We worked together in Dodge City." Color touched her cheeks, but she held their gaze. "I promised Belle I'd watch out for her. I failed her then, but maybe I can help protect her boy now." "Come inside," Ruby said after a pause. "You look like you could use some water." Around the kitchen table, Amos gurgled in Ruby's lap, while Margaret drank deeply, gathering strength. "Gage Hollis is worse than you know," she began. "He's not just an adulterer. He's built his wealth by ruining young women. Promises marriage gets them with child, then disappears. Some he pays off. Others—" Her voice broke. Belle wasn't his first, and she won't be his last. "But why come forward now?" Cole asked. Margaret opened her satchel and laid out a packet of letters. "Because he's done it again. A banker's daughter in Denver. This time her father has clout and hired investigators. They're tracking down every woman Hollis deceived. The letters told the same bitter story, sweet words, False promises. Children left to chance. There's going to be a trial, Margaret continued. Fraud, abandonment. The prosecutor wants witnesses. I thought you should know in case Hollis gets desperate. Ruby held Amos closer, her heart heavy for the unseen children scattered by Hollis's lies. Most of those babies ended up in orphanages or worse, Margaret said softly. Belle was determined hers wouldn't. That's why she braved that winter storm to find you. She'd heard of you, a childless woman and a widowed rancher. She believed you'd understand what it meant to want something you thought you'd never have. She chose us, Ruby whispered the truth, striking deep. It wasn't chance. Belle chose us for Amos. Margaret nodded. She spent her last strength to give him the family she never knew. That night after Margaret left to rest in town before heading on to Denver, Cole and Ruby sat beneath a velvet sky stars kindling overhead. Amos slept between them, one small hand curled around Ruby's finger. Changes things, doesn't it? Cole said quietly. Knowing she chose us makes the responsibility heavier, Ruby replied. But also more sacred. We weren't just convenient. We were chosen. Like we chose each other, Cole said, voice low. Ruby turned toward him, surprised by the feeling in his words. In the months since she'd first stood drenched and defiant on his porch, they had built something more than survival partnership trust. A true family. When you showed up that first day, Cole said, a hint of a smile in his eyes, soaked through and stubborn as a wildcat. I knew you weren't about to break. I thought I was just doing my Christian duty, Cole Hart said quietly, his voice rough with memory taking in Sam Lane's cast-off sister. But you changed everything. This house, the ranch, me. Ruby's heart tightened. We saved each other, she answered softly. And then Amos Lane saved us both. Cole reached across the basket where Amos slept and caught her hand. I know we started this as a simple deal work for a roof, but somewhere along the trail, it turned into something real. Ruby finished for him, real enough that even the preacher's been asking when we're going to make it proper. He gave a half smile. Reverend Clyde Boone has been nudging me for weeks about a real wedding, not just courthouse papers. I kept stalling. I didn't want you to feel trapped. Ruby's eyes shone. Cole. Hart. Are you trying to propose to me? Even in the starlight, she saw the tips of his ears redden. Reckon I'm doing a poor job of it. Then let me help, she said, squeezing his hand. Yes. Yes to a wedding before God and neighbors. Yes to being wife and husband in every way. Yes to raising our boy come what may. Their kiss was slow and sure, their first true one, full of healing and the promise of forever. Amos chose that moment to wake and burble happily, as if giving his blessing. 2 weeks later, with summer roses blooming, they stood before Reverend Boone again. This time the whole town packed the little clapboard church. Ruby wore a pale blue calico dress sprinkled with tiny flowers, Cole's surprise from Marcus Cole's mercantile. Cole had trimmed his hair and beard, looking years younger. Amos, perched in Mary Morrison's arms, watched wide-eyed. Do you, Cole Hart, take Ruby Lane to be your lawfully wedded wife? Reverend Boone asked, grinning ear to ear. I do, Cole said, never looking anywhere but at Ruby. And do you, Ruby Lane, take Cole Hart to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, she replied, voice steady and strong. Forever this time. They exchanged simple silver bands that Cole had secretly ordered from the blacksmith. As Reverend Boone declared them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in cheers, and Amos added his own delighted shriek. Outside, May Knox pressed a handmade quilt into Ruby's hands. For the little one, she said gruffly. Every child needs a warm blanket. About time you made it official. Marcus Cole told Cole, with a hearty handshake. To me, Cole corrected with a grin. Best thing that ever happened to me. As the celebration wound down, a rider galloped in with a Denver telegram. Gage Hollis had been arrested, fraud, abandonment, bigamy. His wife had filed for divorce, and his fortune was tied up in court. "It's over," Ruby breathed, clutching the paper. "Was never going to let him near us again," Cole said, pulling her close. "But I'm glad the laws nailed it shut." That evening they rattled home in their wagon, Amos dozing between them. The ranch spread out under a honey-gold sky, no longer a lonely outpost, but a home built on love and grit. "What's on your mind?" Cole asked, noticing Ruby's quiet look. "Belle Hart," Ruby said softly. "I wish she could see this, know her son is safe and cherished." "She knows," Cole answered with quiet conviction. "Somehow she knows." When they reached the house, they found another surprise. The Morrisons and half the neighbors had hung wildflowers and ribbons on the porch. A hand-painted sign read, "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Hart." Ruby laughed. "We've been gone 3 hours, good neighbors," Cole said, his voice thick with feeling. Later in the bedroom they now shared as husband and wife, Ruby stood by the window, moonlight soft on her hair. Cole slipped his arms around her waist. "No regrets," he murmured. "None," she whispered. "You only that it took us so long to get here." From the next room came the gentle breathing of the boy who had bound them together. Ruby smiled. "The ladies in town used to pity me, the barren woman. Now I have a husband who loves me, and a son who fills my heart. Let them talk about that." "They are," Cole chuckled. "Tom Brennan says the saloon had bets on us marrying by Christmas." Reverend Boone cleaned up on the winnings. Ruby laughed softly. "A gambling preacher." "A romantic one," Cole corrected. "He said he knew the first Sunday you walked into church with me that God had plans for us." "Maybe that's what family is," Ruby said, touching Cole's cheek, broken pieces, choosing to fit together. "Then here's to broken pieces," Cole answered, kissing her with quiet wonder, "and to the love that mends them." Outside, a lone wolf called to the night. Inside, their world was whole. The woman who once feared she'd never be a mother, the cowboy who had buried a wife and child, and the little boy who needed them both. They had turned loss into lasting joy. Morning would bring Amos's cheerful chatter chores and all the small miracles of ranch life. But for now, they held each other close, a family knit together by choice and grace. By harvest time, Ruby guided the wagon down Cedar Ridge's main street, with Amos, now a sturdy 18-month-old, with Cole's gray eyes and Belle's gentle smile balanced on her hip. Neighbors who once whispered now waved and called greetings, eager for a glimpse of the boy who had captured the heart of the whole town. Morning Mrs. Hart. Marcus Cole called from the mercantile doorway, his voice carrying over the creak of wagon wheels. "That boy gets bigger every time I see him." "Growing like prairie grass," Ruby Lane said with a smile, shifting Amos Lane to her other hip. "Cole swears he'll be helping with the cattle by next summer," she added. "Wouldn't surprise me," Marcus chuckled. "Got his daddy's knack with animals already." His daddy. The words still swelled Ruby's heart. Family born not of blood, but of 1,000 everyday choices and steadfast love. She finished her errands, flour, coffee, and fabric for shirts, aware of the gentle buzz that followed her. But the whispers had changed. A real miracle how that boy pulled them together. Never seen Cole Hart grin so wide. Ruby looks 10 years younger these days. At the post office, she found a letter addressed in careful, unfamiliar handwriting. Balancing Amos as he tugged playfully at her collar buttons, she unfolded it. "Dear Mrs. Hart, you don't know me, but I knew Belle Hart. My name is Rose Catherine Mills, and I run a home for women in need in Denver. Belle stayed with us before Amos was born. She spoke of you often, never by name, but she knew about you, the childless woman married to a widowed rancher. She believed God showed her where her baby belonged. I wanted you to know that her choice was deliberate and made with love. She gave Amos to the mother he was meant to have. Ruby read the letter twice, tears blurring the neat script. Even now, Belle's quiet courage kept revealing itself, each piece, confirming what Ruby already felt in her bones, that some families were written in the stars long before their members met. Mama Amos patted her damp cheek, puzzled. "Happy tears, sweet boy," she assured him, kissing his forehead. "Just happy tears." The ride home was peaceful. Amos dozed against her shoulder as the wagon rolled through autumn's gold and copper. When the ranch came into view, Ruby caught her breath, as she always did. Fresh paint shone on the house and barn. The garden stretched wider, neat rows, heavy with late vegetables. New fences ran straight and sturdy across the pastures where fat cattle grazed. But it was the small touches that told the truest story. Bright curtains at every window, flowers nodding along the porch rail, and a rope swing dangling from the big oak. By the barn stood Cole Hart, waving as he finished settling a horse. "How are the ladies at church?" he asked, steadying her as she climbed down. "Full of talk about the harvest social," Ruby said, handing him the letter. "I volunteered us to help set up." "Of course you did." Cole teased, though his smile was easy and warm. He read the letter slowly. Ruby watched the play of emotion cross his face. She knew he said at last, voice thick. All along she knew. "Papa," Amos squealed, reaching for him. "Come here, son." Cole caught the boy and tossed him high until giggles rang out across the yard. "Want to see the new calf?" They walked toward the barn together, a family like any other, unless you knew the trail of heartache and second chances that had forged them. That evening, Ruby prepared supper while listening to Cole outside, patiently teaching Amos to whistle. Through the window, she watched them, her world contained in two beloved figures. A year ago, she'd believed her life was over, her worth buried with the children she could never bear. Cedar Ridge had thought so too, shipping her off like damaged goods to a man they believed was equally used up. Two broken halves meant to cancel each other out. Instead, those broken pieces had fused into something stronger than whole. The widower who thought his heart lay in a grave had learned to love again. The woman once certain she'd never mother a child now rocked one to sleep each night, and the baby destined for an orphanage grew under a roof of fierce devotion. "Supper's ready," she called. Cole and Amos came in together. Amos riding high on his father's shoulders, both laughing. The table that once sat silent now rang with life. Amos babbled about the calf in a jumble of half-words while his parents listened as though he recited poetry. Afterward, Cole read aloud from the Bible while Ruby mended, and Amos played with the wooden horse Cole had finally finished carving, not for the child he'd lost, but for the son who had helped heal that wound. "He setteth the solitary in families. He bringeth out those which are bound with chains." Cole read, his deep voice steady. Psalm 68. Ruby said softly. "Seems fitting." Later, after Amos slept in the crib Cole had built, they sat on the porch, hand in hand, beneath a spread of stars. "I've been thinking," Cole began, "about adding on to the house, another bedroom or two." Ruby's heart jumped. "Oh well, Amos won't stay a baby forever, and the Morrison boys are always underfoot. Might be time to leave room for what's ahead." Ruby's eyes widened. "Cole. Hart. Are you saying I'm saying this family's got room to grow?" he said with a quiet smile. "However the Lord sees fit, natural or otherwise." Cole Hart laced his fingers through Ruby Lane's and gave a quiet squeeze. "What we've built here, Ruby, It's solid, strong enough to hold more love than we ever dreamed. Ruby thought of every child still waiting for a home like Amos Lane had found parents to claim them a place to belong. "The ladies in town will chatter," she said. "Let 'em," Cole replied, a half smile in his voice. "They've been wrong about us since day one." He was right. The same neighbors who'd shipped her off as a cruel jest had watched her return remade. Not because she'd given birth, she hadn't, but because she'd become something they'd never imagined a mother without bearing a child. A wife who'd redefined marriage, a woman whose worth had nothing to do with her womb. "I love you," Ruby said. The words still felt new and rich every time. "Have I told you that today?" Only a dozen times, Cole teased, drawing her close. "Tell me again." She did, and then they let the silence settle, watching night deepen over the ranch they'd built together. Tomorrow would bring its share of chores and surprises. Ranch work never rested, but tonight they felt complete. 18 months ago, she'd stepped off a wagon full of shame and convinced she was useless. Folks in Cedar Ridge had meant to make sport of her, a barren woman paired with a widowed cowboy. But heaven, it seemed, had its own kind of humor, or maybe just a truer sense of family than the town gossips. "We should go to town tomorrow," Cole said at last. "We go all the time," Ruby reminded him. "Not like this," he said. "I mean to the harvest social. Dance with my wife, show off our boy. Let everyone see what we've built out of what they once tossed aside." Ruby smiled in the darkness. "That doesn't sound very Christian Cole Hart." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but it's plain human. And I'm proud of us, Ruby. Proud of what we've made." "So am I," she whispered. Proud of the home they'd raised from dust, the love that had rooted in wounded soil, the family they'd chosen for themselves. The woman once mocked for barrenness now had a son whose laughter filled her days. The man who'd buried his heart in grief had found purpose and joy again. And the baby who'd arrived like a winter miracle had brought redemption to them both. "All right," Ruby said at last. "We'll go to the social. We'll dance and laugh and show them that the finest families aren't always made the usual way." "Amen to that," Cole murmured. Inside, Amos stirred and gave a soft cry. Ruby started to rise, but Cole caught her hand. "I've got him," he said, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips. "You rest." She watched him disappear into the warm glow of the house, this man who'd dared to love again and sat a moment longer beneath the vast prairie sky. Soon she followed Maybe to sing the lullaby that always settled their boy. For now she breathed in night air scented with distant rain and wildflowers. People had thought the joke was on her, the barren bride sent to a broken cowboy. But Ruby knew the truth. The joke was on every person who measured worth by a womb or a bank account. Out here, 20 miles from their judgment, a better story had taken root. Love wasn't about bloodlines or convention. It was about choosing each other day after day. It was about piecing beauty from the broken. From inside came Cole's low voice, carrying the tune she'd taught him. Amos's fussing quieted, soothed by his father's song. Ruby smiled and went to join them, her family. The woman once called Barren had indeed come home with a child, not as anyone expected, but in the way that mattered most. She had come home with love, with purpose, with a future bright as the prairie stars, and that she knew deep in her heart was the truest miracle of all. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.